I'm Indy Neidell.
I'm Spartacus Olsson.
And I'm Anna Deinhard.
And this is not another one of our fireside chats that we've been doing lately where we have questions and answers from Sebastian or Anna about different parts of World War II. This is actually an Out of the Foxholes live where we're going to get questions from people out there.
Your beloved community members.
In my beloved community in the multiverse. And we're going to answer those questions. Some will be we'll see who gets what, okay?
Yeah.
This
is going to be exciting.
It's going to be exciting because it could go either way. However, we'll probably edit it so it makes us look good.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, we would never.
At least my answers.
Yeah, at least your answers. Okay, what do we got?
So, Antoine B. asks, you discussed a long time ago the hypothesis of Spain getting involved in the war and what it could have changed. What's your take about the French colonies? We spent the past months looking at the struggle in North Africa. So I wonder if there was a critical miss around the time of the French capitulation and Mirza Kabir, that's exactly what I wanted to say.
I can see where this question's going.
Battle that could have been done differently and what would have kept France fighting from the colonies. Why didn't it happen? And would it have been viable or would have been any way crushed by the Axis? Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, you could definitely take
you
that.
Sure?
Yeah, no, please go.
Okay, what people fail to understand is after the fall of France, when the Vichy government was set up, the Vichy government was the legal, legitimate government of France. The French colonies were responsible to the Vichy government. They weren't. There was no free French. De Gaulle and people who were out of the country or escaped. There was no organized setup or resistance, which took time. The Vichy French government was accepted by the world. It was recognized by most of the world as the legitimate government of France. So those colonies were part of the Vichy government. As such, why would they fight against Germany? Their war against Germany had ended. It had ended with France's defeat. The Vichy government was still allowed to administer those colonies, and Germany was happy for the Vichy government to administer those colonies. This, of course, caused problems eventually in Syria, if you look at the regular episodes, when you have Free French fighting against Vichy French. And of course, with the colonies in Southeast Asia, when Japan wanted to do things, obviously the Vichy French could do nothing about that. They couldn't send force from Europe over there. That's just not possible. So there was no opportunity missed, because who was to organize? Let's say, okay, France falls and you're somebody like de Gaulle. You can't just go down to French Equatorial Africa and go, come on, boys, we're going to... No, because you have a legitimate government recognized by the rest of the powers in the world. Now, when Operation Torch happened in November 1942, and Francois Darlan, the admiral, when he agreed to change sides and to work with the Allies, this is what prompted Hitler to get rid of the Vichy government and just take over France and run France directly. So the colonies actually not revolting against the Vichy government was probably a good thing for the Vichy government and then them in terms of its own existence in the long run.
I'd add to that if they would have chosen to fight with the Allies, this would have been potentially a war crime, because they were not fighting, in that case, they were not fighting for an official government. And if you are not an official government force, you are an irregular force and you are not subject to any of the protections afforded under the Geneva Conventions or the Hague Conventions. So that's one problem for them. And the other problem would be that it's a war crime. So they would be liable for fighting an illegal war.
Eric Starhawk wants to know.
Starhawk. Cool name.
Cool name, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool name.
Is he from the Rhode Island Starhawks?
I think he might be from the Connecticut Starhawks.
Oh, well, then it's not nearly as cool, sorry.
So, anyway, he wants to know, recent World War II shows have pointed out that the decision of the British command to bomb German population targets over more military targets. Is there a good document that shows why? Well, this is a deep moral question. I'm leaning in more of a strategic look back instead of the good moral question of why. As part of the Battle of Britain, it's always said that the German error to bomb London was a massive blessing to the British military, as they were on the wretched edge of losing the battle based on ground losses of aircraft. So, if the British knew that, why would they change focus from military and industrial targets to populations? Seems that the one thing that saved the British from defeat would be the wrong choice to apply to the enemy. On a related note, when did German industry move underground to be more robust to bombing?
Okay, we'll take that in two parts.
You're the bombing guy. I'll just kibitz. You do it.
Yeah, I think we're going to take that in two parts. We'll get back to the last question, which is the easy one to answer. The first one is more complicated, significantly more complicated. But let's go back to 1939 and look at what the idea was on the British side regarding this. They had concluded in several legal opinions, both directed at the RAF and directed at Downing Street, that bombing civilians was illegal, even if it was done by mistake. The other thing was that inside of the RAF, there wasn't really a big support for strategic bombing as a viable strategy in any way. People like Hugh Dowding and Park were proponents of a fighter strategy in order to disable and take down the opponent's air force, in this case, the Luftwaffe. But there were a couple of people that were pro-bombing as a way forward. Among them, Trafford Leigh-Mallory, Lord Beaverbrook, who was the Minister of Aviation Production, and of course, the biggest proponent of bombing, Arthur Harris. So that's number one. Then you have the legal thing. Now, there's another thing, and that is that after the Germans bombed Rotterdam in 1940, by mistake, the gloves come off regarding the legal bit, and they decide, okay, we are going to try to do some bombing, and we're going to go ahead and bomb some cities in the Ruhr, or not some cities in the Ruhr, some industry in the Ruhr. But this doesn't turn out to be very effective. And one of the people who loses confidence in the idea at this point is actually Winston Churchill, who's prime minister by then. So he's not a supporter anymore, and the other guys are isolated. But already by November, Hugh Dowding and Park are out, and Trafford Leigh-Mallory is in, and Lord Beaverbrook...
Can I just kibitz? I really like Dowding and Park.
Yeah, so do I.
I really like Dowding and Park.
So do I. They're really good guys. They're very clever as well.
They were the
real
future.
Pity.
They were the future.
They would have really, really made a difference for how the war was fought if they would have stayed in control. So by now, we have a leadership inside the RAF who is much, much, much more open to the idea. However, by mid-1941, the Butt report comes out, and this is an analysis of the bombing they've done so far, and they conclude that they can't even hit a town properly if they try. They see that the average distance from the intended target of a bomb is actually 8 kilometers. So by now, there is no practical support for the idea of bombing, of precision bombing. Precision bombing is no more. It doesn't exist. But, and this is where things get interesting, by this point, Winston Churchill is under an immense amount of pressure, both from the public in Great Britain to do something, anything, against the Germans. And Stalin is harping and harping about opening a second front. They don't have any way of opening a second front on the ground at this point. So the only option they have is to actually go in and do something from the air, basically bomb Germany. And since we've already seen in the Butt report that they can't hit a barn at 2 meters distance, the only option left is really to follow Arthur Harris' idea. And Arthur Harris' idea is that and this is contrary to everything they experienced themselves during the Blitz, but he still manages to convince people that you can bomb Germany into submission. And they start bombing cities with the 1,000 bomber raids, and they start doing that in 1942.
It just makes people angry.
It just makes people angry.
As it did to the British. As it does to everyone who's ever been terror bombed. It doesn't bomb you into submission.
We see it recently in Ukraine. It's not, you don't bomb people in submission. You bomb
them into getting really angry and hating you.
Yeah. So actually support for Hitler hardens during this time in Germany. There is a portion of this which is let's bomb industry, but the RAF is not capable of doing that. As we just said, the Butt report. But there's also the other side of it, and that is that they don't have any way of defending themselves during the daytime. So even a modicum of precision is gone because they can't even do area bombing of industrial targets because that would require daytime bombing. And they don't dare do that because they don't have any fighter support. So they continue nighttime bombing of German cities in order to break the back of the German people. That's the strategic idea behind it. It doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. It actually serves Hitler and Goebbels in their ideas of then declaring total war, which comes in 1943. But then the USAAF enter into the fray in the early days of 1943. They've been resisting being part of this in the first place. But there is this idea, and that is to actually do exactly what the question asks. Bomb the Luftwaffe out of existence and do it by bombing industry. And they start doing that with some effect, but that's also not very effective. And that is the answer to the follow-up question, because in early 43, the USAAF during Big Week hit the Ruhr area big time. And this prompts Speer to completely change his way of thinking about production. And that's when he starts moving all of the industry underground, relying on slave labor from the concentration camps under horrible conditions, and actually manages to continue increasing production, which is the second whammy in this failed strategy. So you asked, what was the strategic thinking? Well, there's both of those sides, but both strategies fail because the Germans thwart the idea of destroying industry, and the idea of bombing civilians is failed because it doesn't really break morale, it creates morale. So those are the answers to those questions.
Okay, Hank Trotter. Why did Japan wait until 1944 before they started a large offensive into India? Since it was already clear that Japan and Germany were losing important battles in 1943 and British India was important, a successful invasion of India was their only chance to change the course of the war.
No,
that's a good question.
It wasn't their only chance to change the war. Now, there's two ways to look at this, right? One, you can look at it as a general country thing, and two, you have to look at it as the Army-Navy thing. Did Japan lose battles in 1943? Yes, they did. The Japanese Navy lost a lot of battles in 1943. I mean, after Midway, the Japanese Navy was increasingly on the back foot. Japan was creating the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, which was where they had all these places like Burma and Malaya under their control, and they had free trade, which meant basically Japan took all of their raw materials and the locals got to live in poverty. But it was still, that was the thing. India was never intended to be part of that. The whole point, though, was China was supposed to be part of that. The war in China started in 1937. By 1943, it was still going on, and Japan was having successes. Did they have setbacks? Yes. But they had major successes in 1944 and still could not take China. Widening the war against the next biggest country population-wise in the world, that was never part of the plan. And turning the war around, what they wanted to do to turn the war around was the Ishigo Offensive in 1944 in China. That was to turn the war around. But again, let's get back to the losses. You have to be very specific when you talk about Japanese victories and losses, whether they're naval or army victories or losses, because there was a big separation and a big rival between the two. They did not work together well. They were bad playmates. I think it went back to a volleyball game, actually.
Between Himmler and Rommel?
Between Himmler and Rommel in 1923, and they had bet on different sides. I'll get to that in another fireside chat. But the Navy had been suffering the setbacks, Guadalcanal and the beginnings of the island hopping campaign and stuff. But the army seemed to be doing fine. The army had taken Burma, the army had taken Malaya, they'd gone into Thailand, they were doing good. There was no reason to turn the war around for an army that was on its front foot, that wasn't losing. And attacking India in any case wasn't going to turn the war around. Now, the reasons for attacking India, when they did the Impal and Kohima campaigns, which we covered week by week in the regular episodes, which we're not asked about, so I'm not going to cover them here. That's a different thing, but you have a misapprehension. In 1943, the Japanese army, the IJA, had no reason to turn the war around. They were firmly convinced they could still win the war against China and create the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere.
Scott Chomosky. I'm very sorry if I said it wrong, but feel free to correct me and be mad at me in the comments. Did Winston Churchill try to make an aircraft carrier out of an iceberg, referring to Project Habbakuk and the Pykrete aircraft carrier, I assume?
Well, it's Pykrete. You're champing at the. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm champing at the bit.
I'm going to give it on this.
So the answer is absolutely.
Yep.
This is a real true story.
He's one of our heroes, the guy who did.
Yeah. Jeffrey Pike created something called Pykrete.
Like concrete, but it's Pykrete.
Yeah. What he did, well, you explain Pykrete. What it is.
Taking sawdust and mixing it with water and freezing it, which makes it super hard, like shooting a bullet hard doesn't destroy it.
Actually, you know that Mountbatten did that?
I was going to get to that in a second. But it also doesn't really melt. So his plan was to build aircraft carriers out of it, floating, because they are unsinkable, because it's ice. You can break it into as many pieces as you like, and it's not going to sink. Now the Mountbatten, you tell them the Mountbatten thing. They were.
Well, yeah, it was Mountbatten. It was Churchill and Roosevelt were invited to have a viewing of the miracles of Pykrete.
Miracle.
And how resistant to bullets it was. And as the story goes, and there are actually a couple of verified witnesses to this story. Mountbatten pulled his gun, shot into the block of Pykrete, and it didn't break, but the bullet ricocheted and hit an officer's leg, grazing him.
But imagine if that had killed Churchill, Like, what happened? Well, on the positive side, we have a great new material for building aircraft carriers. There was one little hitch. So, no, Pykrete's awesome. But carry on.
As far-fetched and crazy as this might sound, there's an actual use case for this. That's the mid-Atlantic gap. Right. So if you look at the Atlantic, air coverage only goes so far at this time.
From land bases.
Where you can actually start. And having aircraft carriers out there is really difficult because that takes a lot of fuel and you have to go into harbor. It's a big problem. So the idea was, let's create an aircraft carrier that doesn't have to go in and be refueled. Let's just anchor it out there.
It's just there.
And it's just there, right?
It's made of ice.
And this was then the proposed Habbakuk. So it was going to be 600 meters long. So 600 meters long runway floating in the middle of the Atlantic, powered by
made of ice and sawdust. Imagine working on
cooled by diesel motors that then run it all. Yeah. And they actually went ahead and built a 1:4 scale of this in Lake. I can't remember what the lake is called. It's in Canada anyway. And they put it up there, and they had conscientious objectors built this, but a few things happened on the way. So first of all, it became really expensive because you have to have diesel motors cooling it all the time too.
But in the North Atlantic, it's less than half a year you have to have diesel motors cooling.
But still, it does require quite a bit of fuel, and it requires that. But also, just the whole construction process is amazingly expensive because you have to make all of these ice blocks, have to put them together, and so it's like building a ship plus the freezing process. That's basically what we're talking about. And by the end of 1943, the range of bombers and fighters had become so big with extra fuel dumps and all of that. So the project was canceled because of that.
But yeah, Jeffrey Pike. Yeah.
It wasn't actually the first time somebody proposed this. A German guy proposed it in 1930 as a good idea for creating aircraft carriers.
And that man is my great-grandfather, Ernst Neidell.
That would be awesome.
I don't know. He used to play volleyball with Himmler back in the teens.
And
no, this was before.
Oh, it was before Rommel.
This was before Rommel and Himmler were on the same team. This was just Ernst Neidell.
Was he a tall guy?
He wasn't. He was quite short, but he had a good outside. Well, you don't do outside layups in volleyball, which is why because he kept confusing it with basketball, so they threw him off the team. So Himmler had no problem with him. Not like Himmler had a problem with Rommel. That volleyball rivalry.
There's
a book in there somewhere.
I think so too.
Okay, so that was it for today. Thank you for all your lovely questions.
They were good. They were good questions.
They were good questions, yeah.
Very good questions.
Okay, Sparty, you want to take them home or do you want to take them home?
No, I'll do it. If you want your questions answered in one of these, please join the Time Ghost Army at the officer level, where we will at some point guarantee to answer your questions that you submit for Out of the Foxholes.
Out of the Foxholes. All right, you guys ready to really take us home?
We
Put it
are.
to bed?
Okay.
All right, see you next time.
Excelsior!